Hello, podcast fam. I am thrilled to share some exciting news. My book, So Grow Lead, is officially live on Amazon. This book is more than just my story of starting a nonprofit and building a peanut butter factory in Malawi. So trust me, the ups and downs of that journey are worth the read. It's also packed with practical strategies to help nonprofit leaders like you tackle challenges with clarity, courage, and a whole lot of heart. If you've ever wondered how to turn your vision into reality, navigate the inevitable hurdles, and build something meaningful, whether in your organization or in your own life, this book is for you. I'd be so grateful for your support in spreading the word. Grab your copy of So Grow Lead in the show notes and on Amazon today. Let's keep sowing seeds of impact together. Welcome to the Lead with Heart podcast, which is dedicated to nonprofit leaders who are passionate about making a difference. I'm your host, Haley Cooper, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on a journey of growth, inspiration, and transformation. At Lead with Heart, we believe that leading with heart means embracing empathy, compassion, and authenticity in every aspect of our work. It's about putting people first, fostering genuine connections, and creating a positive impact that goes beyond numbers and metrics. In the nonprofit world, it can often feel like we're carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders. The challenges are immense, and the road can be lonely. But here, you're not alone. This podcast is a community where we support each other, share our stories, and learn together. Each episode will dive into personal and professional development topics tailored specifically for nonprofit leaders. From innovative fundraising strategies and effective team management to self-care practices and leadership insights, we're here to provide you with practical strategies that you can apply to your life and work. My goal is to empower you, elevate your leadership, and engage your heart in all that you do. I want to help you navigate the unique challenges of the nonprofit sector with confidence and resilience, so you can continue to create meaningful change in the world. So whether you're driving to a meeting, taking a break, or winding down for the day, tune in and join us on this journey. Together, we'll discover what it truly means to lead with heart. Thank you for being here. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Lead with Heart podcast. This is your host, Haley Cooper. And today we have an exciting guest with us, Mike, who is the co-founder of StratSimple. StratSimple is a groundbreaking tech startup that leverages artificial intelligence to automate best practices for strategic planning and beyond. And I am so excited for Mike to share his insights on how your organization can utilize AI to enhance your work, the importance of annual strategic planning, and why OKRs are the ideal solution for tracking goals in the nonprofit sector. Well, welcome, Mike.
Thank you so much, Haley. Appreciate you having me.
Can you start by explaining a little bit more about StratSimple and how it uses AI to automate strategic planning?
Yeah, you got it. So my background is in strategic planning. I worked in the for-profit world for a long time, led strategic plans for really big companies. And I got into the nonprofit space about 6 years ago. And for the last 2 years, I've been a board chair for a $20 million nonprofit. And so I've been in their strategic planning, and seeing the differences between the two was enlightening and eye-opening, because nonprofits just don't have the resources that a big company does to solve this sort of thing. And so about 2 years ago, I started getting really deeply into AI. I'm a complete geek and just fell in love with the technology and knew that we wanted to build a business that could highly leverage AI. And one of the things we realized is we can use AI to help nonprofits who can't afford the expense of traditional strategic planning have resources that they couldn't have before. And so that's why we created StratSimple, was to try to, sometimes we say, democratize strategic planning, right? How do we get more people to be able to get the help they need?
Yeah, I love that. And like you said, a lot of organizations have the mindset, it's a mindset, that there are limited resources.
Yeah.
Strategic planning is such an important piece. And obviously, like, so many organizations do strategic planning and then it sits on a shelf. How can nonprofits, because AI is, like we were talking like before we hopped on the call, is like the hot topic right now. It's a buzzword. Everyone is understanding. Like, so first off, why don't you start with explaining what AI is?
Yeah, absolutely. So The way I like to explain it is artificial intelligence is anything that can replace a task that used to require human intelligence. Simple as that. There's a lot of different flavors. The one that we're using is called generative AI, the one in the news a lot right now, ChatGPT and things like that. And that's a special kind of AI that can actually create new content. I wouldn't go as far as to say that it can think, but it can connect the dots between things and see patterns. And there's actually some research that shows it can be more creative than people are sometimes because it comes at things from another perspective. So we use AI to both help extract good insights out of people and to summarize information. But one of the really important things about AI is knowing when to use it and knowing when not to, right? And so when it comes to strategic planning, we don't use AI to actually build the plan or make the decisions. We're using it as a tool to take care of some of the administrative work that takes a ton of time and resources. But ultimately, we believe planning is always going to be a human job. So that's a big part of it, is figuring out where to draw the line between those things.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up, because I'm thinking, like, when you said originally AI is doing stuff that maybe it can replace a task for humans. And a lot of people, when they think of AI, they're like, wait, is it going to replace me as an individual?
Yep.
Is it like for great writers or marketing? People are like, is it going to replace me? But I think that's an important distinction, is there's a separation between what AI can do and what humans need to do as well. And I think
Absolutely.
that was really important. And what are some specific examples of how AI has transformed strategic planning for your clients?
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing. So when you look at what drives the cost of strategic planning, and it can be pretty expensive sometimes, a big part of that is doing all the interviews and soliciting feedback from the community and clients and partners, and then summarizing it all together. There's one client we're working with that we're surveying 2,000 stakeholders, their clients, like community partners. Imagine how much work that would be to hand do that many touch points and interview that many people. Honestly, it'd be cost prohibitive. And so what happens is organizations never do that with 2,000 people, and you limit it to a smaller number of people. But when you do that, you lose some of the inclusivity and the diversity of thought that comes from spreading a really wide net. And so we use the AI to actually help people answer the questions. It interviews them a little bit. So we put questions in, and as they answer the questions, the AI will have a conversation with them and help extract the most valuable insights. And then the other part is, and if anyone who's ever tried to build a plan, or even I think any survey you've ever run, if you send a survey to 100 people, you have to read through all those results. And that is not a ton of fun. And so what we use the AI for is, once all the surveys are back, we extract all the themes and the insights, and we package that up for the consultant or the client themselves, whoever's facilitating it, and saying, here's the insights you really need that are going to be the core feedback that drives the planning. That's been a really big part for us.
Yeah, I definitely think that is so beneficial. And like you said, there's cost reductions in the way that you're able to utilize AI in this process. And when you're talking about talking with stakeholders, and before we hopped on this call, I told you that I had Mina that talks about AI when it comes to data, and she does a lot around surveys with stakeholders. So I'd love to know your input on that as well. What questions are you asking the stakeholders, and how are you communicating to them how the survey questions are going to be used? And then how do you gather that data?
So the survey is actually run out of our own software, which is StratSimple. And that needs to be the case because of the way we do the coaching. And so a typical survey, one of the things we feel strongly about is the right questions for the right audience. And so the questions you give to your board members or your leadership team are going to be very different than the questions you give to your clientele. For the clients, it's generally what's working, what's not. How do you see your future needs changing as you look forward at your own life so that we can plan around the community's needs? But you can imagine, if you've ever done, there's a traditional part of strategic planning called a SWOT. It stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And if you don't work with it all the time, it's not intuitive. So the first time somebody fills one out, they generally struggle a little bit, because when you talk about things like threats, those are supposed to be external trends. What people end up talking a lot about is like internal weaknesses or things that they wish were different. And traditionally, that's one of the roles of a consultant, is they're like, hey, that's a great input, not quite what we're looking for. And they'll help direct people to give the kind of input you need. That's a case where our AI steps in and says, hey, I love the input you're giving, but we're really looking for this instead. Let's coach you towards giving the kinds of answers we need. And we can do it in a really delicate and respectful process that gets them to want to partake in it. The other big part of this that comes in is these modern AI models are super fluent in languages. And so it lets organizations that might have multicultural clienteles, we can do surveys to folks who are Spanish language, and the AI can actually coach them on English when that might not be their primary. Maybe their English is a second language. It can help make it more inclusive and include more voices in that way as well.
Yeah, that's so beautiful that it can really expand that and really make it inclusive so that people feel a part of the community. They feel like they can contribute to how the organization is going in the future. And like you said, the organization can then listen to people in their community to help better meet their needs. And I think that's such an important piece of nonprofits, especially when you're doing that strategic planning, is to really listen instead of finding a solution and saying this is going to work. Like, you have to understand what the community needs are and then how to co-create that future together.
Absolutely. Yep.
So you talk a little bit about strategic planning should be done annually at least. Why do you believe this? And what are the key benefits of this regularity for nonprofits?
Love that you asked that question. This is something I'm really passionate about. And so it's traditionally, strategic planning was done on a 3 or 5 year basis. You'd hear those kinds of things. I think the notion that was frequent enough was probably disabused for a lot of us during COVID, if it wasn't before then, right? Because if you were building a plan in early 2020 and said you were going to do XYZ over the next 3 years, boy, the world didn't cooperate with your plan and things changed. And the reality is, it's not just huge events like that. The pace of change is just accelerating all around us. AI didn't exist at all 4 years ago. And at this point, it's transforming whole industries. And so those kinds of things really need to be involved. And especially so many nonprofits are impacted by the changing winds of elected officials and policies and programs and funders' priorities. And those things change pretty frequently. And so what happens, I think part of the reason you mentioned that strat plans go on a shelf is you build a strategic plan for 3 or 5 years out based on the reality you have today. And if it's outdated 6 months or a year from now, well, sorry, this isn't really relevant anymore. We're just going to do it again in 3 to 5 years. And so the base cadences that we really see working really well for people is an annual plan. And so the nice thing about that too, though, is it doesn't need to be quite as exhaustive as a 3 to 5 year plan, because you're going to be refreshing it on a regular basis. And in fact, we actually recommend for folks, yeah, you should have an annual plan. You should break it down into quarterly bites that you can actually execute on, because even something that takes a year to do, that's really hard to build a plan around. You got to break things down to small pieces to make them achievable. And so you still can have those long-term visions. We call them strategic pillars, right? And say, hey, we're going to get into this new program over the next 5 years. Great. That's awesome to have a vision for the organization. But when I think of the word strategic plan, what makes a plan is that it's actionable. We need to break it down. And that's the part where we really want to see people building an annual plan on what you're going to deliver.
Imagine a fundraising partner that not only helps you raise more money, but also supports you in retaining your donors. A partner that helps you raise funds both online and on location, so you can grow your impact faster. That's DonorBox, a comprehensive suite of tools, services, and resources that give fundraisers just like you a custom solution to tackle your unique challenges, helping you achieve the growth and sustainability your organization needs, helping you help others. Visit donorbox.org to learn more. Yeah, I think that's so important. And I would love to know because you say break it down into bite-sized chunks, do it every year, but along with a strategic plan has to come a budget. Yep. And from my experience, it's what I've been told, at least, and I love your feedback on this, obviously, as the expert, you're not supposed to just do an annual budget. You're supposed to do a 3 to 5 year budget. And so how does a budget coincide with strategic planning?
I think the reality is, I think the budgeting cadence depends on the organization. A lot of organizations, the ones I've been involved in, really can't do a multi-year budget because the funding priorities are changing on a more frequent basis. And that decides a lot of what we have the financial resources to do. And on the flip side, and it's not a negative thing, if you're budgeting for some limited constraints, as you said earlier, and I agree, it's a mindset. If you turn up the knob on fundraising and suddenly you're getting more resources than you had before, then you've got opportunities you weren't planning for. And so this annual cadence really becomes a good cadence for building both the budget and for building how you're going to leverage that to deliver resources. Doesn't mean, to your point, I think where the long-term budget gets really involved is in like capital expenditures. If you're trying to build a new building and that sort of thing, yeah, you absolutely need to be planning for those kinds of things. But when you think about how organizations deliver on their mission and get stuff done, it's about the tasks that are tracked on a smaller time frame to do that. You can take that, if we're going to build a new housing facility and we know it's going to happen over the next 3 years, great, we should have the budget for that, but we should still break that into what are the annual pieces we're going to do towards getting it done.
Yeah, I think that's so important to break it down and even break it down quarterly as well. I've worked for organizations that review their budget annually, and then we're getting towards the annual goal and they realize they're not going to meet the budget or their goals for their strategic plan. But there was never a conversation in the C-suite and down to the development team of how we were going to raise those resources. And so I think it's really important to, you said, have that long-term vision. That's great, but also bring it back to reality and to really understand the landscape of philanthropy and not the nonprofit sector so that you can be agile and adjust as needed. I would say pivot, but I know pivot is people are over that word. So agile might be a better word, but on how people can really navigate that budget and strategic planning piece.
Absolutely. I just want to build on something you said, that whole idea of triggering the right conversations, that's so important. And that's one of the things we do in our solution is we really try to guide people towards this goal setting software called OKRs. It stands for Objectives and Key Results. It's a really popular thing out in the world. But the idea is you establish an inspirational point that's your objective of we're going to go do this thing, and then you agree on really measurable results. And one of the things that we like to see is you're tracking those OKRs. It's not just about the number. It's also about a gut check, because this is where humans bring something that technology can't. People have a sense of things, if things are going good or not going good, and you can't, quite put your finger on why you feel nervous about this. But so as people are giving their updates on their goals, on their strategy goals, we want to see them update the measurable stuff, but also tell us, do you think you're on track or do you think you're off track? And if you can't quite know why, but you think something isn't going right, we want to flag that as early as we can so we can start having the conversations to give people the support they need to hit their goals. That's the goal.
Yeah, I think that's so important, and to hold each other accountable throughout the process. Besides OKRs, which we can talk more about, what are other key pillars that must be included in a strategic plan?
Absolutely. So I think the first piece, as we talked a little bit about, is getting a wide net for feedback. You want to have an inclusive process with diverse perspectives. Generally, we're seeing surveys include leadership, the board members, funders, which can include government agencies, depending on the nonprofit, clients, community partners, other agencies. So really anyone who's a stakeholder in your organization's success and helping the community, get their opinion. You never know when the idea is going to come from. It's going to really give you a whole new perspective on things. That's first. Second, super important to get the leadership and the board together, aligning on their response. Sometimes you hear of an organization where the board built the strategic plan without including the leadership team. Horrible. Or the executive director built it without asking anyone else their opinion. No, we don't want to do that. We want to get everyone together who's going to be responsible and make sure they buy in. And the best way to get people's buy-in is making them part of the process. And then the last part, and I think you hit on this, Haley, is making sure you have some sort of structured approach where people are being accountable. We want to make sure that every deliverable has one person who's responsible for providing updates to the team and tracking its performance. And we really want a process where people are doing regular updates. And so we actually encourage folks to do just a minute or two a week of update everyone in the organization on where those strategic priorities are. And it's amazing how valuable that is. When we talk to clients sometimes, that's one of the things that scares them up front, is they're like, oh, doing a weekly update, that's scary. But once they see the value of everyone knowing where goals are at and seeing the progress and being super transparent, it's almost like magic in separating the most important strategic things from the everyday, because everyone's busy. And if you don't make the important a priority, then you just get dictated by the urgent. And that's not the way to move things forward all the time.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that even before you got to the OKRs, you talked about that buying and belonging piece. And that's a lot of what we talk about on this podcast. And I had Tucker Wanamaker on the podcast who we talked about that. We were like, you have to get buying and belonging before you get strategy, or your strategy will fall flat. If you write the strategy and then provide it to people, but people didn't have input, it's just not going to go as well as you anticipate it. And so people have to buy into that vision and feel like they're contributing to it from the get-go.
Absolutely.
So you talked about OKRs as a core part of your approach to strategic planning. So can you dive a little bit deeper? Obviously, you talked about what it meant, but could you talk a little bit more about what are some challenges nonprofits might face when implementing OKRs and how can they overcome them?
Yeah, great question. So for folks who aren't familiar, OKRs are just the structure of objectives and key results. But one of the things that makes them special is there's some hard and fast rules. And one of those is that an organization shouldn't have more than 3 to 5 top objectives. And that's not frequently what I'll protect the guilty. And one of the organizations I worked for in the past, when I joined, they had 40 top priorities in the organization. If you have 40 top priorities, you don't have any priorities, right? Everyone's just scrambling, trying to do what they can. And so one of the benefits you get from OKRs is you really have to prioritize. No, these are the most important things. And that frequently doesn't happen because it takes really conscious effort to have those conversations with a team to prioritize. And so that's the first sort of magic powers that OKRs have. The next is the key results. They look a lot like a SMART goal, right? Where it's time bound and there's a very concrete measure. But the neat thing about them is if those key results are done, the objective is done. And so the example I frequently give for people is imagine we're talking about a person and say that everyone on the call is probably familiar with what a KPI is, the numbers at the highest level. As people, we have those too. And so blood pressure is a KPI for a person. And my doctor cared about it the day I was born, and they'll care about it the day I die. And if I'm not happy with that KPI, well, then I would build an objective to make it better. So I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to get my blood pressure down a little bit and make my doctor happy with me. Great. Well, what are the key results to do that? Well, if I walk 10,000 steps every day and I eat under my calorie goal and I cut back on salt, my blood pressure is going to get better. And so that's the way OKRs work. And we can apply those to organizations also. And so that sort of structured approach is really helpful for people. And what we've done in the software is build some coaching in where the AI actually helps guide people through how to set good KRs. Because the hard part for people is if you give them a blank sheet of paper and say, set a good goal, it's way easier to start if somebody else helps you and gives you somewhere to start, and then you can tweak it versus starting from scratch. And so that's what we're trying to help with in the software.
Yeah, I love that. And I love how you broke it down into a specific example that can then translate to how people can really leverage it. And there's so many different ways that you can name it, right? Like SMART goals, KPIs, like OKRs. I don't know if there's a difference, but it all goes towards the same reality of, and that's how I like to approach things, is like having this big audacious goal and then breaking it down into time-bound reality and who's accountable for it, who's going to be responsible, and making sure that person knows or that team knows that they are in charge of this OKR.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So looking ahead, how do you see AI evolving in the realm of strategic planning?
I think that models are getting smarter and smarter every year. There's a lot of research showing that it's actually getting exponentially faster. So not only is it getting smarter, it's getting smarter faster. And so there's a lot that comes into that. Right now, there's a lot more work on our side to double check and triple check and quadruple check the work and make sure that people are getting the very best results out of this. That level of human supervision will always be necessary, but less so the more and more we get it. So I'll give you an example. Right now, as we summarize all the surveys together and we give this document of here are the themes and insights, it does exactly what we ask it to do, but we give it to the consultant. Frequently, there are still consultants involved when we work with a client because there's a ton of value to having the human element facilitating the room and guiding the conversation. So frequently, the survey goes to the consultant and they can tweak things and they can modify it. But imagine we can get to a point in the future where the AI can actually understand how that consultant or how the client is thinking about things, and we can even automate the tweaks and the edits they have to. So the capabilities are growing. I'll give you another example where it's going. Right now, the surveys we're doing are all written surveys where the coaching happens. One of the things that's happening, you may have heard GPT-4o that just came out, has conversational AI where it can respond voice to voice. And so one of the things we're going to be able to do in the future is if working with nonprofits that have clients that are maybe not tech savvy, we can do the surveys with a phone call, except they're not talking to a person, they're talking to an AI. They won't even know that unless we tell them, and we probably would tell them. But the point is, we can start automating more things than just textual tasks. We're going to be able to start automating things that are voice-based as well.
Yeah, and I think that's so important that like throughout this process, you're really making it accessible to everyone to be able to utilize it while maintaining that human-centeredness.
Yeah.
What innovations or trends should nonprofits be aware of to stay ahead of the curve?
One thing is, do pay attention to what's going on in the world of AI in general. If you don't have an AI usage policy in your nonprofit, you should make that a top priority coming out of this podcast. There's some really scary things that can happen where I can almost guarantee you have team members using AI. It's something like 85% of professionals are using it, even if it's not authorized. So the best thing you can do is help people be safe. If they are putting confidential proprietary stuff into one of the free AIs, your information can actually become training data for these AI models. There's been a lot of companies bit by that, so don't let that happen. We publish on our LinkedIn a lot of stuff about strategic planning, but also just about safe AI in general. So find some trusted resources that you enjoy and make sure you're staying up on it, because this is literally changing the world. There's a lot of economists that are actually proposing that the impact of AI is going to be larger than the impact of electricity on how things work, which is a crazy comparison. But
yeah, and I think you make an important distinction, because that was going to be one of my questions. If you're doing client surveys, or we all have to share client stories and ethically, right? We want to ethically be able to collect their stories, inform them how they're going to be used, where they're going to be used. And so how can nonprofits still use AI while ethically keeping the confidentiality and dignity of the people that they're serving?
absolutely. So the easy answer there, and even the sort of things we're automating with software, nonprofits can do themselves, not quite as easily, but the important thing is to pay attention to the fine print on these things. I'll use ChatGPT as an example. If you're a free user, everything you type into it becomes training data for their next model. So you wouldn't want to put any client information in there. On the other hand, once you start paying them and you subscribe, you no longer become their product, and suddenly you get to use their product and they actually maintain your confidentiality. So the way we work with the AI engines in the background is we have contractual provisions that everything we're sending back and forth is locked down and secure and can't be used. And so you want to be really cognizant of when the information you're using is going to turn into their product, and pretty much don't let that happen.
Do you have any resources or examples of those policies that we could share in the show notes for our listeners?
Absolutely. I'll put that together and give you a link for it, and you can put that in the show notes.
Yeah, that'd be super helpful for people to really understand, and obviously follow you on LinkedIn, which we'll talk about at the end of this podcast, where people can follow you. But I think that's really helpful for people to have that example or context into how to put that together and start having those conversations with their teams on the proper usage of AI.
Absolutely.
So how is StratSimple planning to evolve its AI capabilities to meet the future needs of nonprofits and other organizations?
Great question. So we are looking at getting into some of the voice analysis. We're also looking at how do we help the facilitators more. So one thing we didn't talk about is we automate a ton of work on the front end, and we give coaching. Once the consultants go home and the company, the organization's left on their own, we help them set goals. But there's this really important part in the middle, which is facilitating the strategic planning day, getting people on the same page, negotiating compromise, getting that buy-in. That's really a human-led thing. We have no intention of trying to automate that part. But what we can do is provide tools that make that more streamlined as well. So as we look at our future, you can imagine we tend to break people into small groups, and there's lots of small group work. We're looking at how do we use AI to help facilitate those small groups, because if you've ever done one of these strategic planning days, the consultant goes back and forth between the small groups, and they're sometimes left looking for questions. How can we really empower the experts to be present more often? One of the things I like to think about is really want to be teaching people to fish instead of providing them fish, right? We want to help upskill their skills so they're empowered. And one of the things that these AI agents let us do is provide a little helper that whenever they're stuck, whenever they need a little bit of support, instead of having to set up a meeting or call someone, they have that help front and center available to them inside the tools they use.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And you talked about the facilitation piece and how important that is. So I'd love to touch about that a little bit more. What are the key, again, like I asked for strategic plan, what are the key successes that you look for that would come out of that facilitation? What needs to be involved in that conversation?
I think one of the things we see as a best practice is really having the facilitator work with the staff leadership to bring in some quantitative data. So as we're doing these surveys, we're getting people's opinions, lots of qualitative stuff, but you do want to have financial data involved. You want to have demographic studies of the market involved. Those are things that helping the staff ask the right questions and find the right data. That's a really useful thing that happens. And then really coaching the executive director through the process of what this looks like. It's intimidating for people that don't do it all the time. If this is something you've only done 3-5 years ago, or you've never done one before, most people want to have someone to hold their hand, right? And say, hey, let's design these surveys together. Let's figure out who they need to go to together and have someone help them. But then when you get to the facilitated day itself, that's critical. And I'm a huge believer in psychological safety. And even in the most psychologically safe teams, there's something special about having an outside person make sure that everyone's voice is heard, right? Because even if the CEO or the executive director isn't trying to, there's intrinsic power that comes from the position. And sometimes if they say something, a team member will maybe not challenge or push back, not because they're trying to, but if there's not an unbiased outsider in the room to make sure everybody's being heard, that dynamic can get lost sometimes. And so we think there's a lot of value in having someone there to facilitate the conversation.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And we talk a lot on this podcast about psychological safety. So what are some things that before you even get in the room, and then once you're in there, I guess the executive director or the consultant can create that psychologically safe environment? Because I think it starts before you enter the room, and then there's things that need to happen in the room for people to continue to feel safe.
It sure does. And so one of the things, and we've said it already, is make sure they're included, right? So we do a lot of pre-work before you get in there, and we want everybody in the room to have already been asked their opinions before they get there. And so they've already feel like they're heard. One of the questions we like putting for staff surveys is, what unanswered questions have they been afraid to ask so far? And so one of the things that the facilitator can be the person that brings those in. And so you can help get those unanswered questions out in the air a little bit. The other thing is really coaching the executive director through how to approach this. One of the things we like to see is the executive director really come in with a perspective. Yeah, we're going to build this together as a team, but it shouldn't be started from scratch, right? We want the executive director to come in and have a message on, here's why our organization is important. Here's why we should be proud for the mission that we're making the world a better place, get everyone excited about it. And here's what I think is important as your leader. And one of the things that we always coach people to say, as soon as they share what they think is important, it's really important to say, and I want to hear your opinions. I'm not telling you what the answer is. I'm just telling you my opinion. We're going to figure it out together. Consciously verbalizing that it's safe to disagree. And that to me is one of the most powerful things a leader can do to get the team to realize that, oh, this is a safe place for us to disagree and to take risks and to work together on things.
Yeah. And I think that's so important. And like you said, like when you do create that environment, people are ready to take risks together. They're going to innovate. They're going to better collaborate and communicate. And so it'll be more productive to provide that space and really be intentional about it, because the process will turn out so much better. And so we talked about AI all the way to psychological safety through strategic planning. What other advice do you have for people as they embark on a strategic plan?
Just know that, think to yourself, and you can try this yourself. Go and interview a couple team members and a couple board members and ask them, what are the 2 or 3 most important objectives we have for the year? And if you're not getting a consistent response from everybody on your extended team that you asked that of, you've got an opportunity. Because if they can't tell you what those biggest objectives are, they're not focused on them on their day-to-day either. And so that's the indicator that maybe we need to do a little bit more on building a plan, and just building a plan, communicating it with people. So the strategic plan is a process. It's not an event. Once you have the plan, it's then about getting people on board and continuing to reinforce it and communicate it. But I like that sort of self-check occasionally, which is go and ask people. And if you're not getting the answers you expect, then you know there's room for improvement. And it's an improvement worth working. Occasionally we'll run into organizations that say, well, we're too busy to build a plan. That's also one of the biggest indicators you need one, right? If everything's a priority and everybody's scattered, that's really a sign that it's really even more important than normal to take a step back and figure it out. And I'd encourage everyone to look at annual plans and try to get into that frequent cadence of breaking things down and doing big, important work in small pieces.
Ooh, that's so good. Well, where can people find you, Mike?
I'm really most active on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with folks, and I post on there pretty often.
Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've learned so much, and I'm going to have to go back and listen to it and just really dive in deep into all the different areas that you've covered. And I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you, Mike.
Me too, Haley. This was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
If you have valued these stories or learned something from what you've heard, please share this podcast episode or follow me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for your support, and together we can build a better community and world.